Welcome to Genius 100's G100 Live with your host, Julie Toscan. And special guests, Jan Creamer and Tim Phillips. And now, from the comfort and safety of her own home, please welcome Julie Toscan.
Welcome to G100 Live. Thanks for joining us today. There's so much out there online, so many choices. Our goal with G100 Live is to introduce you to people who will make you feel your time online with us was well spent. A recording of the show will be available later today on both the Genius 100 Visions Facebook page and YouTube channel. If you'd like to ask questions of our guests, email info@genius100visions.com. Your questions will be answered and posted on our Facebook page. G100 Live aims to highlight the work being done by members of the Genius 100 community. We bring accomplished, compassionate minds together to reimagine the future and to implement creative ways to improve it. Joining us today, one of the Genius 100 visionaries, Jan Creamer, and her husband, Tim Phillips, founders of Animal Defenders International. For the past 40 years, they have worked passionately, and tirelessly for the protection of wildlife. Let's watch this clip. Hi, Jan and Tim. Welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. I've been so excited about the opportunity to speak with you both today. How are you doing?
We're doing very well, Julie. Thank you so much for inviting us. This is just a wonderful opportunity to talk about the animals.
It's nice to be in touch with the outside world again.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We just saw a wonderful clip on some of the work that you do. Can you describe to us what it was we were seeing in that clip and how and the work as it relates to Animal Defenders International?
Well, the clip that you saw is about the animals we rescued in Peru and Colombia and Guatemala. And these animals are rescued from circuses. So ADI campaigns around the world to get legal protection for animals. And one of our largest campaigns is animals used in entertainment, specifically circuses. So when a country passes a law to ban the use of animals in circuses, if they need our help, we go back and we say that the illegal circuses, we can go there, we can take the animals and we'll relocate them. And so the animals you saw all came from circuses in Peru, Colombia, and Guatemala, and one animal from Africa.
So what perhaps our unique selling point is that ADI does start to finish campaigning. So we do undercover investigations to expose the way these animals are treated. We take that information to the public, whether that's in Europe or the US or South America, and then we fight for legislation to end this suffering. And then the operations you saw that Jan just described, we help governments enforce these laws. So we go in there, if we secured a law banning circuses, we go in there and we'll empty every single circus cage.
Now, what do you see that I might not see as someone that just goes to a circus and is entertained by what I see in front of me? What are you seeing that the public isn't seeing?
You don't see behind the scenes. And one of the easiest things that I can describe for most people to understand is that if you go to a circus and you see the big cats rushing into the ring, tails whipping about, looking to us as if they might be excited, there's someone standing behind the curtain with an iron bar, and they've been screened and terrorized into rushing into that ring. And I think that's what we need people to see, is to understand the hidden suffering, the cost to those animals in pain and suffering just for a few minutes of entertainment.
And now, in how many countries have you been able to change legislation so that they do stop animals in circuses?
Well, there's over 45 countries have now banned the use of animals in circuses. We've helped enforce several of those laws, particularly in Latin America, where we've needed to go in and help empty the circuses after the laws have been passed. And I think it's a key moment in the way our human relationship with animals, in that there's all these different countries, places like the UK, finally, countries in Europe, countries across South America that are very different, like Bolivia, Peru, Colombia. All of these countries have stood together and said, this has to stop. They've not said, let's moderate this, make the cages a little bigger. They've said we should not treat animals in this way to just amuse ourselves. And we're seeing it spreading across the world.
Well, congratulations. That's a lot of change. Thank you. What do you do? So that leaves these circuses shut down. The animals are no longer being used for the purposes of the circus. What happens with those animals?
Well, the first stage for the governments to work out, obviously the circuses can continue performing with human performers and without their animals, but the first problem is normally a government gives the circuses 6 months to a year, sometimes longer, to dispose of their animals. They can give them away, they can sell them, they can take them to zoos. Where we get called in is where the circus industry in a particular country is trying to defy the law in the hope that they can get it overturned by refusing to hand over their animals. And that's why we felt it was really important for ADI, having campaigned for legislation to set these animals free. What you don't want is to see a law fail because a government needs support and doesn't have it. And so we say to those governments, we will support you, we'll come in, will remove the animals from the circuses. A lot of times these governments don't actually have the animal handling expertise. They don't know how they would remove them from the circus and where they would put them. And that's what we can come and do for them. We can set up a temporary rescue centre. We can organise the collection of the animals. We go in with the police and the wildlife officials and take the animals, and we take them back to our temporary rescue centre. And from there, we find the homes and we organise relocation abroad.
And now you have a sanctuary in South Africa. Can you tell us a little bit about that, where you bring some of these animals?
Yes, we do. We purchased the land in 2018, so very, very recently. We've got 455 acres. We believe we're possible in taking animals back to their natural habitat. It's not possible to do that all the time, but we have our rescued bears in Peru. We have monkeys in enclosures we built in the Amazon in sanctuaries there. And we have our own sanctuary in South Africa where we give them a life as natural as possible. So our smallest enclosures there at the ADI Wildlife Sanctuary are 2.5 acres. Our biggest are about 10 or 11 acres. So these animals, we get to keep them together. We keep them in family groups, and they can express themselves as they should in nature. And it's a magical thing to take these animals from these tiny cages that you've seen. I mean, these animals have often lived for 10 years in a cage the size of a queen-size bed. And we get them to see them roam again in Africa.
What I love about what I learned about the sanctuary is that it feels like you've built almost like a safety enclosure for the veterinarians, the people that come visit, the food, everything that you require to keep yourselves protected. But the animals have so much space, and it's often the other way around, right? The animals are in really, really small spaces, and the humans have the freedom to wander around, which it just seems so wrong.
Absolutely, and that's exactly how we feel about it. You go to lots of facilities where, as you say, lots of space for the people, and they have cafes and restaurants and all things to entertain the people, and the animals are just really effectively sitting there like objects. Really, there's nothing to do, nothing to interest them. And so we try to reverse that, and all of the space is for the animals. And as Tim said, it's a truly magical thing. It's difficult to describe what it looks like to see an animal blossom from when we pick them up in circuses. We're looking at a shell. They don't respond. Their faces are blank. You don't see emotion there. They're just waiting to see what you're doing, and you see the shell of what that animal could be. We take them to our sanctuary, and their personality comes out. They blossom. They play. They run. They interact with each other. They have actual relationships, and they talk to each other. It's a really amazing thing to see that transformation.
You shared a story with me that a little while back that it still makes me smile every time I think about it. And it is the monkey who liked to play the joke on the people that were coming to feed it. Please share that story with us. It really is worth sharing. It's so cute.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Toto the chimpanzee.
Yeah, this was Toto the chimpanzee, who really sort of transformed the campaign in South America, and in many ways really touched our lives. And this picture you're seeing right now, that's how we first saw him. We were at a conference in Chile, and there was this circus with this chimpanzee who'd been chained up alone for 20 odd years. He'd been torn from the wild in Africa, trafficked to the US, ended up in a circus, and they were keeping him in a tea chest, like a typical packing crate. That's how he lived every night. And we took action. We eventually had Toto confiscated. And whilst he was in a temporary center in Chile, he used to actually take things off visitors and barter for them. He was so intelligent. And he would say, use a tool, even a stick or something, to hook someone's handbag in. And then he wouldn't just barter for the handbag. He'd take out like a lipstick, and he would go, I want this,
drink.
A soft drink usually, and show that he wanted to drink something and bring it to me. And he would barter every single item in that handbag before giving it back. But the real magic of that story, which Jan could probably talk through, is when we finally took him back and took him to his own kind again.
And what are we seeing now?
This is him in Zambia, and the picture you're seeing is of the first members of Toto's little family. Obviously, he was a castrated male, and it was a rescue center. They don't breed, but they get lots of babies from the wildlife trade, smuggled babies. People kill the chimps in the wild, take the babies from the mothers to sell them as pets or for other industries. And what was, as Tim said, what was truly magical, Toto had been alone for over 20 years. The 2 other babies who were stolen with him had died. And when we got him back to a long journey to Brazil, and then to South Africa, and then to Zambia, we finally got him to Chimfunshi, the wildlife orphanage where he lived for the rest of his life. And as we approached, he heard the voices of the other chimpanzees. He made a noise, and they all started calling out. They knew someone new was coming. And it was just magical to see the change on his face. Suddenly someone was speaking his language. He understood what they were saying to him. And we took him to the temporary area where they received the new chimpanzees. And he went next to Madonna. You see Madonna in the picture there. She was 5 years old at the time, and she had just been rescued from the pet trade. And he went next to Madonna, and he touched his first chimpanzee. They pushed their hands through the fence, and they grasped hands, and they did not let go. They stayed like that for the whole night. And we went back in the morning. They were still together. And the owner of the orphanage said, we should just try him. He's so gentle. Let's just try him. And they opened the gate between them. She rushed forward. She grabbed Toto like that. She buried her head in his chest, and he hugged her, and they just stayed like that. And all of us could see how much that meant to them, to be able to talk to someone who spoke their language and to be able to feel something with another being of their own kind. It was an amazing experience.
And just to add to that, during that first hour that they were together, they expressed all of the emotions that you or I would if you'd been alone. If someone had kidnapped you, changed you to a radiator somewhere, and left you there for years and years and years with no hope of ever seeing anyone you knew again. And there was like sadness. They comforted each other. And he gave her his blanket, the one thing he had in the world, the blanket he'd nested on as he flew with us from South America. And they played with that, and it was just utterly joyous. And all of the animals that we rescue, people often think it's the violence, the man with the iron bar behind the scenes beating the animals, that's the worst thing. But this deprivation, this isolation and loneliness, it's easy for us to understand in chimps. They express themselves the same way. But these lions, tigers, the other monkeys, the zebra, all of these animals have that range of emotions, and it's deprived of them, and that is the worst suffering these animals endure.
But it's amazing with the even the amount of time that they're apart, that those feelings and those things are still there, that they can so easily come back together and know what that feels like.
Exactly. And we can, in many ways, what people are going through now, the kind of sense of isolation and deprivation of other human company, it gives people an idea of what that feels like. And as Tim said, what it's important for people to understand is that all of the animals have emotions. We're only just really starting to identify and understand the emotion. Animals share the same kind of emotions as we do. They communicate. They feel pain and fear and distress. They feel loneliness. And all of those things are important in order to live on planet Earth. You need emotions as part of our existence on this planet. And all of the animals that we've rescued have all expressed those emotions. I mean, even sometimes it surprises people when I say that, our lions have a sense of humor. And we often see them playing tricks and playing in ways that shows that they're actually enjoying themselves and playing tricks on each other and on people.
Now, I want to ask you, because it relates a little bit to how people interact with these animals, or how they want to interact with these animals. And sometimes in many ways, like you do, they need to, and in other ways they shouldn't. And a perfect example of that is that, you know, incredibly successful Netflix series called Tiger King, right? Viewed by millions of people around the world. How does that messaging through a show like that affect the work that you do?
Oh, sorry.
Well, I think it's been incredibly damaging. What we've seen already is that this park has had queues at it for people to go see the animals that are captive there still. It's got people on TV saying they'd like to own a pet tiger now that they know they can get hold of one. So it's had real consequences, because what it did was it subjugated the suffering of animals to this human drama, and it turned it into, oh, it's all about flamboyant characters dressed as this, that, and the other. It disgracefully portrayed Big Cat Rescue, a sanctuary that we've worked with, and they were unrecognizable in that from the way they actually care for the animals.
So tell us a little bit about that. What makes a sanctuary a good one?
Principally, a sanctuary is a real sanctuary when it's taking the animals and caring them for life, not breeding. The animals aren't required to perform in any way. They're not there for entertainment. They're cared for life. They're given the freedom to be themselves. And, you know, there is an international organization. We can send people the details. The Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries sets standards for the care of wild animals and other rescued animals. And it is important for people to look to see whether something is a genuine sanctuary. I think what was most disgraceful about Tiger King, or is most disgraceful about it, I should say, is that it completely ignored what was happening to the animals. It was so taken up by making a kind of trashy human story, even when we were looking at baby tigers, actually, as they were being born, were being hooked with a metal bar and pulled away from their mother as she was giving birth. I just can't imagine anything more horrific that you can do to a mother giving birth. And as Tim said, it gives people the wrong ideas. The point is that we have to start seeing other species as our neighbors on planet Earth. This is their planet too. You know, they've evolved to exist here, and they have their wants and their needs and their desire to live, and the desire to live in their family groups the same as we do. What they do on programs like Tiger King is they relegate them to just an object, just like a stuffed toy for entertainment, no consideration for the wants and needs of that individual being. It's so disrespectful. And is there any legislation? Is there not legislation in the U.S. that doesn't that stops that from happening? Like, people are allowed to have these animals as pets, aren't they? In many places.
Yeah, the Big Cat Safety Act, which is currently before Congress, would stamp this out, this horrific abuse. Because make no mistake about it, if you tear a baby animal away from its mother, that is cruel. If you ever see a baby animal, whether it's a little monkey or whether it's a lion cub or a tiger cub being passed around for photos, there is a mother crying out in anguish. Now, all of us know that as human beings, that you shouldn't be tearing babies from their mothers. Yet somehow we've turned a blind eye to it for so long. And this act, if people go to the Animal Defenders International Facebook, they can find the links there, how they can get in touch with their member of Congress, and how they can get this law passed, because it is insane that in 2020, this is still going on in the United States.
We'll be posting all of those. We'll be posting all of those links, because I agree, it's incredibly important. We need to give a voice to these animals that don't have one. It's so brutal and unfair. But I really do want to ask you about that, because I thought you're out there doing such incredible work to try and save these animals. And then there are shows like this that come up that end up being incredibly successful, and the messaging is so wrong, and it must be just incredibly frustrating. I wanted to ask you about zoos. So my kids grew up going to zoos and the occasional circus, and I have to say that I feel like, in a way, I feel like that is what made them more compassionate towards animals, because they're seeing them not in the way you know they're being treated, or not in the way you do. But is there any advantage? Are there any zoos that you think are okay?
No, well, the problem for zoos is that they're primarily places of entertainment for the public. So, as we said earlier, the animals are in their enclosures and they're there to be viewed by the public. There's no consideration in zoos for the private life of the animals. If we really want to care for these animals, rescue them when they're in trouble, keep them safe if they can't go anywhere else, then what they need is their private life. They need to be able to get away from people. They need to be able to converse with their own kind, be with their own kind. And I think that, what's so disappointing about so many zoos, you see so many facilities for the public. And then I think the other problem is that what zoos can't get past is that the animal that people are seeing is not behaving as it would in the wild. It's not expressing its natural repertoire of behaviors. It can't, because it's in an enclosure that just by being inside an enclosure is stressful. Even if they live there all their lives, it isn't the rich, varied environment. It isn't the life they evolved to live. I think that's a main problem with zoos. We have to move away from the idea that the zoos are helping the animals. We need to help the animals in the wild.
Yeah, I think we need a kind of a sea change in how animals are perceived in captivity. We are going to be stuck with animals in captivity, certainly for all of our lifetimes and the lifetimes of children and their grandchildren, because a deer will be walking home tonight and could get hit by a car and be injured and not go back in the wild and go in the sanctuary. There's got to be a radical shift, though, and it has to be more like the sanctuary that perhaps allows visitors, but that access has to be limited. Some animals don't want to be looked at. They react aggressively, they react stereotypically, and you see that too often in zoos. There has to be no deliberately breeding. Lions aren't threatened in the wild because they can't breed. Let's get rid of that myth right now. We don't need to keep breeding more lions in captivity. Just got to stop killing them in the wild and stealing their habitat. They'll fill the space fine themselves.
Now, is there an alternative? So the sanctuaries maybe a little bit as an alternative to zoos. Is that something that you find are zoos looking for ways to become more like sanctuaries? Do you feel that, or no? Because people are supporting them anyways and going, and they'll keep doing it for as long as people go.
Some zoos are becoming very enlightened, and they're looking at how sanctuaries do things, and they are trying to do a similar thing. I mean, one of the things that the zoo needs to do is stop trading in animals. There are millions of animals being bought and sold around the world, and zoos contribute to that. They need to stop breeding because they have nowhere, when they have their new lion cubs and tiger cubs and other babies every year, they have nowhere for them. They have to either sell them on. Sometimes the animals are killed because there is nowhere for them to go. So we need to, if we have a captive population like that, we need to stabilize that population and push the money that we spend on zoos, push that into protection of the animals and their habitats in the wild.
And I think something I find incredibly disturbing and has happened in many instances where, you know, someone is at a zoo, or someone is feeding an animal at a zoo, and you know, they fall into the lion cage, and the lion, you know, attacks the person, maybe killing the person, and then the animal gets killed. And I don't understand that. It is their natural, I mean, that is their natural thing to do. And I was surprised to hear that oftentimes it's the public that wants the animal to be put down. I had assumed it was some sort of law or regulation, legislation.
Well, they pay the price, don't they?
Yeah, it's a sign of where our relationship with animals in captivity and in the wild has got out of step. We had a case where we raided a circus in Peru, and we were able to secure half the animals. We got 3 lions, but they kept back 1 lioness's cubs and a big castrated male lion. And this lion, his act was to jump over a member of the audience, and they brought in someone from the audience, and they stood them between 2 pedestals, and Smith, this great big, I mean really huge lion, was meant to jump over them. And you see on his face him looking down, and he's just looking playful, and he leaps down onto this woman, drags her all round the ring, and luckily she had a big thick coat on that saved her life. But there were calls for him to be killed, and Jan and I went on television and we were saying, the only one who didn't volunteer to be in the ring was the lion. The only one behaving naturally was the lion. Everyone else was distorting any sensible natural behavior, because a human's natural reaction to a lion should be step away straight away. And in the end, we secured a confiscation order. We went back and we rescued all of those animals. And that lion, Smith, is living in our sanctuary now with his friend, his brother Ray, and he's one of the most playful, fun animals. So he's not at all aggressive. And there was at the time now a petition to have him killed because he had attacked a person.
Wow.
That's his friend Ray. That's his brother.
You know what, before, we're going to take a brief commercial break in just in a few minutes, but before we do, can you tell us a little bit more about the animals at the sanctuary? How many do you have there now? What are they?
We have 43 now, and we have the lions that we rescued from Colombia and Peru. We have them in their family groups. There are some that that are boys together. We call them our boy bands. Some family groups are okay together. Others, it's male groups, usually 2 or 3 together. And basically, their day is about giving them the freedom to do what they want to do. We also have a new group of tigers, 12 tigers from our rescue in Guatemala. We brought lions and tigers just in January this year. We brought them out of the circuses in Guatemala, and they've just been absorbed into the sanctuary.
You have room for more?
We do. I suppose if we completely filled the sanctuary, maybe 200.
Yeah, we've got 455 acres. The thing that would stop us, and the thing which is hitting us now, is lack of funds, because it's crashing at the moment during this crisis.
And how many staff do you have on the sanctuary? How many veterinarians are there? I mean, it must be a lot of work, and yeah, a lot of funding required to be able to care for those animals. We have 9 staff altogether. And the core team is kind of between 5 and 6 guys at a time. They feed them each day. We feed them 6 days a week, and they have Sunday as their kind of day of rest. And basically, the idea with the lions and tigers is to get them used to the idea of eating just a little every day, and then they can exercise and they can play and do what they like with their day. Special days, we give them lots of additional toys. They really like tires. They like tires tied up on frames so that they can jump on them and attack them and swing on them.
They like cardboard boxes. What cats don't like cardboard boxes. So we put hay in the cardboard box, and then things like lavender oil and catnip. They love lavender oil, and they play with those and jump on them and try to get in the box and stick their heads in the box and run around with them.
Our supporters buy industrial-sized bags of catnip for these cats. we bring those to the sanctuary.
Now, with going back to the Guatemala rescue, did most of those animals come to you at the sanctuary?
Yeah.
The majority of them. We actually took 3 tigers to Big Cat Rescue in Florida, who we mentioned earlier, and they're having a wonderful life there. But in January, actually just before the lockdown started to bite, we flew 17 lions and tigers out of Guatemala on 1 aircraft. And it was a really, really difficult journey. We had 5 lions on there and 12 tigers. We had a team of 5 with them, including a veterinarian, monitoring them all the time. But it was very, very hard to get a flight. And in the end, we had to go from Guatemala to Mexico, to Belgium, to Qatar, and then down to South Africa. It was the longest journey we've done. We've previously flown 33 lions on 1 flight. We've flown 25 lions on 1 flight on another occasion. So not our biggest, but a very, very hard journey.
And who helps with those costs?
Our supporters and foundations. We lots of foundations, and a really enormous help is Priority Worldwide Services, is the transport company that has helped us on 2 of the flights, Peru and Colombia, and this Guatemala flight. And they're very, very good. They help us coordinate the transport, and they also donate to the costs.
And we should give thanks to the greatergood.org, which is a fundraising organisation. And really, we couldn't have done the Guatemala rescue without them. And they paid for half of that flight, raised through their supporters and pushing the message out to them. And they also helped raise some funds for our bears. But that flight, we were originally going to fly them through the United States, but they refused to permit the tigers to go through a US airport, even though they were going to just sit in the aircraft, other cargo would come on. And that threw all of the costs. And the price escalated by $90,000 in 1 week. And supporters helped get those animals out.
So you don't get any sort of government funding, like all of the work that you do and all of these transports and the
not even from the governments we're helping.
No, I mean one of the reasons is that the countries we're working in, the reason those governments are in trouble with the animals is because they don't have the expertise and they don't have the money. But when the US passes their circus animal ban, we have a bill in Congress at the moment. At least we do have a good infrastructure of animal groups to help with the animals.
Yeah, and places for them to go. But like Jan says, often these government officials we work with, they're committed and they really want to see these things happen. Certain ones in Guatemala were excellent, but they have no resources. So we're there to help show that these things can be a success, they can be popular with the public. People want to see these animals out of the cages. They may not be sort of registering it all the time, but there's massive success, whether it's Bolivia, whether it's Colombia, Peru, Guatemala. The public support for getting these animals out of these disgusting little cages is massive. The politicians just need to listen to it and get these laws passed.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be back in just a minute and 15 seconds to be exact.
Thank you.
On the centennial of Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity, the Genius 100 community set out to capture the visions of thought leaders from across the globe as they shared their perspective on the next century. Genius 100 Visions of the Future has since become a publishing milestone, representing the world's first 3D printed book, while capturing the imagination of intellects and global citizens alike. Now, for the first time ever, these inspirational writings have been made available. While the 3D book is currently in production and will have limited availability, a 2D version is being created to make its astounding content accessible to everyone. Their message is timely, a glimpse into the future that may be uncertain today, but is filled with hope for tomorrow. You now have the rare opportunity to make this thought-provoking book part of your private collection. Don't delay. Limited copies are in production. Claim yours by emailing info@genius100visions.com.
Welcome back. We have been getting a number, lots and lots of audience questions. So I think I'm going to put my questions aside and we'll get to some of the ones that the audience had for you. Let's start with Karen from Toronto is asking, what are your thoughts on the running of the bulls in Spain and rodeos, Calgary Stampede, and even horse-drawn carriages in New York City? Just your thoughts on those things.
Well, all of those we would class as animals being used for entertainment. And when they're in entertainment, they become an object, just a toy to play with. And what gets forgotten is how the animal is feeling about what's being done to it. I mean, with things like the running of the bulls, the shows where it's deliberate cruelty to animals, I think that it's teaching children especially entirely the wrong view of how they should approach a member of another species. The way that we think about it is, if you think about other species, they communicate. They don't talk in the way that we do, but they communicate with each other. They have a type of language. Some of them have identified cultural practices. They have feelings. They feel pain and fear and distress. They want to live the life that they were evolved to live. And when we treat them like an object, we're ignoring all of those aspects. You know, they're our neighbors on planet Earth and we need to respect them.
Now, what do you do when, oh shoot, I'm throwing in my own question. Sorry, what do you do when something is so ingrained in the culture of a community or a country? That's got to be a lot harder to change.
Well, yeah, animal abuse and animal suffering is ingrained in the culture, and it's ingrained in laws that permit suffering. And so all of our campaigns begin with education and awareness. Just going back to the bull running, and so we've currently got two big campaigns, one in Colombia on bullfighting and one in Peru against these bull running type events where the bulls are literally tortured by drunken crowds. And slowly we're breaking through on that. The bill in Colombia has huge support at the moment, and we are very optimistic that it is going to be passed, and it will be the first Latin American country to ban bullfighting. So you just got to reach people. All of our campaigns are anchored in getting the evidence, putting it before people, and changing hearts and minds, and then you go to the politicians and get laws.
Thank you for that. We have a question from Aaron in New York City about wildlife markets, wildlife and wet markets. You know, we've been hearing a lot about those lately, and I know that you've done some investigating on them, and I know you didn't like what you saw. Can you describe those experiences to us?
I think at the wildlife markets, we've seen some of the most horrific things that we've ever seen. You know, a whole mixtures of all kinds of species, some alive, some are dead, and some of these markets, the animals are killed there and then. And some of the photographs and film we've taken actually are so horrific. They're just too horrific to show to people. But I think that this is part of the whole wildlife trade. What we're doing is we're breaking down the natural barriers that nature has around the world. In a wildlife market, you get animals from all different parts of the planet. in close proximity to each other. The animals are stressed, and therefore that depresses their own immune system. But also they're meeting animals that they wouldn't normally meet in the wild. And all species, carry viruses and illnesses that is normal for their species, but you get those together, you've got a perfect storm, a perfect opportunity for viruses to cross the species barrier and create new diseases.
So these things are causing us problems on several levels. One, they're strip mining the wild. Some of these markets we've been in Africa, just everything is available there, no matter how rare, no matter how exotic. They're also creating this, as Jan says, this disease petri dish, and they're causing all this suffering. And now it's believed that we're all locked down in our houses, people are dying in their thousands, and the world's economy is virtually going broke. Surely we can get rid of these. What are the virtues of these things that cause such suffering that they're going to let them keep going after this?
Well, I've read that some countries have actually shut them down, I believe just temporarily. Do you see that being more long-term or forever, possibly?
We would hope so. We're working with a lot of other groups around the world to push this forward and get these markets closed. The international wildlife trade, as Tim said, it's strip mining the planet. All species are in trouble because of human exploitation. And then we're moving animals across the world that shouldn't be meeting each other. And these markets themselves are causing immense suffering. And it's just not necessary. We would really hope that we can put an end to these wildlife markets and get some curb on the wildlife trade. Personally, we think the wildlife trade should stop, but we'd certainly like to see it much, much smaller than it is, anything to make steps forward.
And you touched a little bit on how in particular with the wildlife wet markets, how our abuse of animals is affecting us globally. And I just wondered, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about poaching, because from what I understand now, that's a really big problem because lack of tourism is sort of leaving less eyes on areas for these poachers who are out there poaching more animals.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's always a problem with enforcement in anything. This situation we're in at the moment is unprecedented, but the whole poaching issue needs a more serious crackdown. Whilst we're saying some people can kill these rare animals if they pay enough, other people can't, even if they're going hungry. There's always going to be this conflict. Whilst we're allowing people to encroach more and more into the animal habitats, there's always going to be these problems. So we have to have a more holistic approach, which is to try and stamp out these things like poaching and take them a lot more seriously. I mean, that goes way beyond where we are now.
And that touches a little bit on it touches a little bit on big game hunting. And I just wanted, because people may try and tell us that it is sometimes okay for specific reasons, and I just wanted to know what you felt about that. I mean, is it ever right because there are too many of a particular species in one small enclosed space and it's doing something to the, our ecosystem? Is any of that true?
None of that is an excuse for big game hunting. Hunters chase and kill these animals from a safe distance for themselves, but they're doing it for fun. It's entirely wrong. And certainly they can't make the excuse that they're helping the species in any way, because their whole aim is to pick the best animals, what they would think of as the best specimen. And surely those are the animals that you actually want to be passing on their genes to the next generation. There are other ways of controlling population, and certainly hunting, big game hunting doesn't actually contribute anything to countries generally. The fact is that widespread tourism where lots of people can benefit from people looking at animals is much better for countries' economies than just a few select people hunting animals for fun.
I think we're running out of time, unfortunately, because I could just speak with you for so much longer. But I wanted to touch a little bit on advocacy groups. You know, you've both been advocates for the rights of animals for 40 years. How have you seen activism change?
I think in some ways it's become more effective. In many ways, it's kind of more of the same. What we say to people is, Animal Defenders International tries to be a really empowering organization. If people go to our Facebook page, if people sign up for our e-alerts, then we'll show them how to get involved. And I think that what we're doing is seeing the fruits of our work. You know, if you go back 20 years, you wouldn't believe we'd be emptying every single circus cage in Guatemala or Colombia or somewhere. These things are possible because everyone's getting behind these campaigns. They're making their voice heard. It's amazing how few people who really care passionately about animals haven't been in touch with their member of Congress and said, I want to see this stopped. And they need to hear from you. And so I think we're getting better and better at engaging people. And fortunately, now we're seeing the results of that. We see an end to cosmetics testing on animals in every European country. We see 45 countries that have banned animals in circuses. So we are seeing really serious laws that are moving the dial for animals being passed. And it's thanks to people getting out there and getting active.
And I think it's hard. I think it's really hard for people to believe that their one voice can make a difference. But it absolutely can. And just talking about the things that they learn and the things that they discover to other people, and sharing that desire to want to do more for animals is so incredibly important. And now we have to wrap up shortly, but I have one last question, and I think that I'd like to ask it because I think that many of us, without bad intentions, whereby animal skin and animal skins, animal furs. What would you say to me if you were trying to convince me to stop doing that?
Well, I think at two levels, to look at the suffering of the animals. I mean, what people have to recognize is that, animals on fur farms, we've investigated fur farms and shown the suffering of those animals leading short, miserable, terrifying lives. Their deaths are absolutely horrific. It's a terrible way for any being to die, to be in pain and terrified in that way. I think there's that aspect to it, but also people need to think of sustainability and the planet as a whole. And we can't go on consuming everything on the planet at the rate that we are and expect it to survive. And, and to expect that there won't be some effect on humans in the long run. If you look at things like meat eating and intensive farming, intensive farming is one of the biggest pollutants causing climate change. All of these things we need to look at, and if we want to survive into the future, we need to change the way we behave.
And I think more options are becoming, fortunately, more options are becoming available to us for things like clothing or the foods, the foods that we eat. And I guess it's our responsibility to ensure that we remain educated and aware and on top of these things, rather than go, no, this is too much information and it's too complicated. So I think that's definitely a role that we have. Now, unfortunately, we are out of time, but Jan and Tim, I want to thank you so much. You've really given us a lot to think about. The work that you do is so admirable. Congratulations on everything that you have accomplished. I really feel privileged to have been able to learn from you today. And my hope for you, as you continue defending the rights of animals, is that the work that you are doing now becomes less and less necessary. But thanks again for everything. We look forward to the opportunity to maybe speak to you again at some point in the future. Keep doing what you're doing. We'll be following you. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
If you'd like to support the animals through the projects that Jan and Tim are working on, visit the link provided at the bottom of the screen. In 2 weeks, we will be in conversation with Genius 100 visionary Jose Miguel Sokolov. Jose Miguel is one of the most internationally awarded and respected advertising creatives. He is most recognized for his work with the Colombian Ministry of Defense in their effort to demobilize the FARC guerrillas of the Colombian jungles. And finally, I'd like to thank you all for sharing this time with us. I hope you all stay safe, and we'll see you next time.